if you're like a lot of people, annual percentage yield, or APY, may be something that kind of makes sense, but kind of doesn't at the same time, especially if you do a CD and you see documents and you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, you told me the APY was this, but the interest rate is this. And there can be some confusion around it. Also, another term that gets thrown in there is APR, or annual percentage rate. Most people don't know the difference between the two. So I'm going to go over those things. I'm going to cover a couple of examples of APY and how to calculate it very easily without using a special calculator to do it for you. So that way when you go to a bank or institution and purchase a CD, you'll have an idea ahead of time of how much interest it's going to have at the end of that term, regardless of how long it is. So if this video helps you at all, I would appreciate it if you would take time to subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos. My name is Daniel, and this is Fellowship of the Frugal. So the best place to start is with the most common question that I get, which is what's the difference between APY and the interest rate? So very simply put, annual percentage yield, or APY, is your interest rate plus any other crediting that takes place, which is commonly compounded interest. So what that means is you have a flat interest rate, but also if you leave the interest inside the product that you're purchasing, such as a CD, then that interest gets compounded over time. And at the end of your term, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, or whatever, you're going to have a final calculation, which is going to be your APY. So the reason that this started, it goes back several years ago where Congress passed something called TISA, or the Truth in Savings Act. So what was happening was people would call Bank A, and the bank would say, hey, we're paying 10% on our CDs. And they would call Bank B, and they would say, oh, we're paying 5% on our CDs. Well, of course, most people would go to Bank A because the rate is so much better. But what was happening is, by the time everything was said and done, they got the paperwork, after all the fees and everything that was taken out, they actually yielded closer to 4%. And that was a big difference between 10 to 4. People were complaining about that because the things that were coming out, all those fees and other things, weren't advertised. And the law said they didn't have to. And so TISA came out to level the playing field so that everything was put out there up front, so that people were doing rate comparison shopping would actually get a true apples to apples comparison and be able to make an informed decision. So that when we quote a rate over the phone or in person, when you ask for it, we have to quote the APY and factor in all those things and what is the actual end of the day yield that you get, everything considered. So that's why that came about, was to do that for the rate shoppers. And I'll add right here real quickly, APR, or annual percentage rate, is basically the same thing, but that's what benefits the bank. APY benefits the customer, APR benefits the bank. APR is the interest rate plus any fees that the bank charges or any expenses or things like that. And APR tells you what ultimately the loan is going to cost you at the end of the term. APY is the same way. It's interest rate plus everything else that gets credited to you. But just remember, the easy way to know the difference, APY goes to you, the customer, APR goes to the bank. But they're basically calculated the same way. So what most people make the mistake doing is when they try to figure out what their APY is, they forget that the A stands for annual. So when they buy a CD for like 6 months and they say, oh, our APY is 5%, well, they'll go ahead and say whatever they deposit times 5%, and they say, oh, at the end of the term, I'm going to have this much in interest. Well, that's a 6-month product, and APY is an annual number, so they forget to divide it by half. So let's look at a couple of examples to show you how to calculate this regardless of what your term is. It's a simple way to do it without having to go find a special calculator, which they are available. So if you really want an accurate number, you can go to an APY calculator online. But this is a way for you to calculate it very simply with a calculator with your phone right there when you're trying to figure out what's the best route. So let's take a look. So here's our example that we're going to look at. I have the first one, which is $100,000, a 7-month CD, paying 5% APY. So the mistake that most people made, as I just mentioned, is when they try to figure out what they'll have, they'll say, oh, $100,000 times 5% equals $5,000 in interest at the end of the CD, right? Well, that is actually incorrect. Again, A is annual, so you have to figure out the annual percentage yield. So 7 months, it's going to be lower than that number. So what you have to do, you must figure out the monthly payments using the APY by dividing the end result by 12 months. So if you look at the $5,000 in interest, then divide that by 12 months, and that equals $416.67 per month. So then you take that number and you multiply it by the number of months that your CD actually is, which is 7 months. So this times 7 months equals this number right here. That is the number that you'll have in interest at the end of the 7 months. Now this is, as I said, is a simple calculation. So it may be off by a few pennies or even a dollar or two, but it's going to be extremely close if you compare that to what you use for an official APY calculator. But this is a quick way to do it, but it's going to be extremely close. So another way to do this is to take the APY and multiply by the number of months in the CD divided by 12. So that one, you take the 5% APY that was quoted to you times 7 over 12, which is 7 divided by 12 months, equals this number. And then you take your deposit, $100,000, times that number you just got, and that equals the same within 1 penny. So either one of those can be used as a simple calculation. So whatever your term is, you take that number of months divided by 12 months, and then that's how you do that simple formula. So they show a simplified interest. Again, it's not 100% accurate, but it's a great way to be really close on what you need to get. So let's look at the other example I have. It's a $50,000 8-month CD paying 4%. So our deposit is $50,000. So in our first method, we take $50,000 times your 4% equals $2,000 in interest, your annual number. You take that number, $2,000, divided by 12 months, and that equals $166.67 per month. That's credited to the account. You take that number times 8 months, again, 8 months here, and that equals the interest yield dollar-wise that you will have at the end of the 8-month CD. So again, divide it by 12 months and then multiply that number by the term that your CD actually is. If we use method 2, we say the 4% yield that was quoted times 8 months over 12, so 8 over 12 months equals this number right here. So then you take your initial deposit, $50,000, times that number, and that equals $1,333.50. Again, within a few pennies of that number, but I don't think 14 cents is going to make or break you if we're talking this kind of money here. But those are both simple ways to calculate this, taking the APY into consideration that it's an annual number. So don't go into an institution thinking your deposit times the APY quoted is going to be your yield. You have to consider the term of the CD. Inevitably, when I explain this to customers that purchase CDs from me, I still have some people that are just straight up confused. They still don't get it. And maybe this is you. So I'll explain this another way that may make a little bit more sense. Let's say that I agree to pay you $1 a month. And so it's assumed if I pay you every month for a full year, then that's going to be $12 at the end of the year. And we agreed upon that. Say we shake, okay, sounds good, let's do it. Well, then 8 months into the year, I decide I'm not doing this anymore, the deal is off. That doesn't mean I didn't stay on pace to pay the amount that was promised. It just means the term was cut short. Now, in that scenario, I'm assuming it wasn't agreed upon on the front end. I mean, when you buy something from an institution, you know on the front end how long the term actually is. You know if it's an 8-month CD. So that's going to be one difference between the two. But the idea is the same. If you're getting an interest yield on an 8-month CD, then your monthly pace will be what the APY says if you go the full 12 months. But if that 12-month period gets short, you were still on pace to hit that number, but the term got cut short. So you're not missing out on anything. You just didn't get to the full 12 months. But if you turn around and do another CD, I mean, it'll go over that, and so there's factors to consider. But the pace of your monthly payment, of the monthly crediting, is going to pace for whatever the percentage is, APY. Just have to consider it may not make it for the full 12 months. And it may even go over sometimes. It just depends on what you purchase. But again, you're going to know that on the front end, so it's not going to be a surprise to you. So you know what your term is. The bank can't up and say, we signed a 12-month contract, but I'm going to cut it short after 6 months. The only time that can happen is if they have what's called a callable CD, which that's a topic for another day. All that means is that they have the right to end a contract early, but again, you know that ahead of time. So I hope that this explanation helps clarify some of the nuances about APY and the difference between interest rate, APR, those types of things. I run into these questions all the time. That's why I thought this video would be helpful to explain that so you know a little bit more before you go in and try to purchase something and then get confused during the meeting, and that can throw you off and mess everything up. So again, if you find value from this, I'd appreciate it if you take time to subscribe, check out my other videos. Again, my name is Daniel, and this is Fellowship of the Frugal. Thank you.